and welcome everybody to this Netsafety Week Digital Parenting Seminar. I'm Martin Cocker, I'm the CEO of Netsafe, and it's my pleasure to be talking to you today about digital parenting. And we'll have a little tour through the challenges of digital parenting, the way that we're feeling at the moment about those challenges, and then some advice as to how we can look to resolve those things and how we can become confident digital parents. So I'm going to switch over to a presentation. Netsafe's purpose, it's important to lay this out, is to help everybody get online and stay and be online safely. So we really see the value in technology, and that is certainly shared by the majority of people in this country who see that the internet has a positive impact on their lives. So the internet brings us lots of positive things, and we want to recognize those dangers that exist there and manage them so that we can have almost all of our time online being positive. There's just some stats that just indicate the sort of significance of the issues around online safety. 10% of adults and 20% of youth report being harmed by digital communication every year. So that is all sorts of harms, from really serious harms to disengaging from education, to disengaging from social opportunities, etc. So 20% of youth every year, that's 1 in 5 every year, that's a huge percentage of people. The estimated cost of dealing with all of that, including the adult aspect of it, is $440 million a year to this country. So it's a huge issue. Nearly 23,000 people will come to Netsafe alone to seek assistance with dealing with those things every year, and 3,500 of those will be under something called the Harmful Digital Communications Act, which I'll explain a little bit later. And also, one of the things that people do is they report to us losses of scams, and nearly $20 million lost, $19 million reported to Netsafe in the last year from scam losses. So these are big numbers and things that affect all of us. And as part of the Online Safety Week, we asked people of New Zealand how they were feeling about the direction of travel for online safety. That 68% of us thought that the internet has become more dangerous in the last 5 years. Would ideally have liked it to become more safe, but 68% of us believe it has become more dangerous in the last 5 years. And then we asked people to look forward and think about what the internet would likely be like in 5 years' time. And 52% of us believe the internet will continue to be dangerous and to become more dangerous. And in 2026, it will be more dangerous than it is today. And only about a quarter feel that it's going to stay the same. So there's not a huge number of us who are optimistic about the direction in which we're traveling. So this webinar and the other activities of Netsafe are to try to turn that around. So I mentioned earlier that mostly people feel positive about the internet in terms of its impact on them overall. If they think about the negative things that happen and the positive things that the internet brings, about 70% of us say, yeah, it's definitely a positive, overall positive influence on our lives. But, and because we're here to talk about digital parenting, this is a particularly important stat. 47% say the internet is net negative for young people, that the harms that have come with the internet outweigh the positives. 47% of us believe that to be the case. So why is that? I mean, 70% of parents believe we have a good knowledge of the risks. 2/3 of parents feel fairly confident about dealing with those issues that exist online. Yet still, nearly half of us think that the internet is net negative in terms of its impact on young people. So what can we do about that? Well, Netsafe has a guide, which is the Online Safety Parent Toolkit, designed to help parents understand exactly how to manage the risks that young people face and create a safe environment for them. And I'll just jog through those 7 steps of the Online Safety Parent Toolkit. So number 1 is to understand the challenges. The reality is the starting point for online safety is to understand safety challenges. So every every young person going on, 20% of young people will have a harmful experience online this year. And the kinds of experiences that they are having are indicated by this graph. But the interesting thing in that graph is that the yellow bar represents the number of parents who believed that their child had faced that challenge, and the blue bar is the number of children who said that they had faced that challenge. And so actually being treated in a hurtful and nasty way, bullying, was something that parents were slightly overestimating. But that their child had been a bully, or that they would have had contact risks, where they would have connected with people who were that they'd met online and then gone to meet, parents were significantly underestimating. So it's important to understand the risks, the range of risks that exist for young people online. And one of the things that parents significantly underestimate is the exposure to a range of harmful content that young people face. So again, looking at that graph, you've got yellow, you've got parents' knowledge that young people have faced that challenge, and the blue, teenagers reporting having actually had to deal with that. So these gaps are pretty significant, and of course that gap represented there is the risk gap, because those are the young people who are dealing with these things without the knowledge of their parents and the support of their parents. And so we want to even those bars out. Ultimately, we'd also like to drive all the numbers down, of course, but what we would like is for whenever a young person faces a challenge, for them to connect with people who can help them. And that is especially, of course, their parents or caregivers. So once we've got our head around the actual risks that exist online, the different risks that young people face, what we have to do is really think about our children's activities online. Young people, there's thousands of different sorts of activities and games and apps and things that they're into, and not every child's risk profile is the same. So to begin to understand that risk profile, what we need to do is learn about our child's activities. And just to show you some research as to what young people are doing online, what you see lots of consumption of content, viewing video clips, 90%, searching and finding content at 74%, then getting down through playing games, instant messaging, going onto social media and using photo sharing apps. But those are still big percentages and showing the majority of young people are doing those things. But what will happen is that your child will be focused on some of these activities, and there is a significant difference between the risks that are associated with, say, just consuming content, where you worry about the possibility that they'll drift onto harmful content, through to gaming, where they may be exposed to the games that are meant for older kids, which have got violent content, or they may meet other gamers through the social connections within those games and the risks that come with that, through to social media, where of course there's the possibility of meeting other people, but also posting content that harms their reputation or leads to trouble later on, or indeed just through the system of social media, getting into exchanges or debates that they are not ready to manage. So understanding exactly how your child spends their time online gives you a chance to think about what risks to focus your energy on managing. And in probably the least surprising slide in this deck, there are differences between boys and girls, and those are borne out in the research, that the girls tend to gravitate towards messaging apps and photo sharing apps, and boys tend to gravitate towards gaming. But I would urge people not to assume that because you have a daughter or a son that they will definitely fall into one of those categories. It is important to understand your child's experience online and the things that they are really into, because whilst those are the norm, there are certainly many exceptions to that. The next recommendation is that we explore the technology. That the best way to really get to understand the things that young people do is to do it with them. So jumping onto games consoles and playing the games, joining them for a little bit on social media, not necessarily having to register an account and follow them, but actually just sit with them and have them show you through those products and have a go at them yourself. Because it's through that experience of exploring it that you get to a position where you will be able to marry up those risks that you've learned about and understand their life online, and to get to the point where you can agree and set expectations that are relevant and meaningful to your child. If we simply just had a templated set of rules, some of those things would be really relevant to your child and some of them wouldn't. So by this stage, you've got to the point where you can construct an agreement. You can agree with your child those expectations in a way that both of you understand why they've been set and understand the risks that they are managing. And again, I just draw your attention to that gap. I'm not suggesting that every child is online having a negative experience, but whenever there is a gap between the number of parents who know about their child's negative experience and their children's negative experience, that gap are then the children that are at most risk of harm. So, we want to get to a position where we are having conversations with our children that mean that they will share with us when they have that negative experience. There are some things that are universal across online safety, and we talk about these in the Parent Toolkit as teaching the basics. So we look at the things like privacy and digital footprint as things that we can teach children as basics, which they can apply across all of the different platforms they go to. So within the Parent Toolkit, we have those basics laid out. And I know for some parents, they feel like it's a challenge to know what the basics are themselves. So not to worry, Netsafe has listed those out, and you can explain those to your child. And for many of us, they're reminders of the things that are wise for us also to do online. Step 6 is to model for young people. The survey that we just did earlier this week, about 11% of parents said they definitely wouldn't be happy if their children behave like them online. The majority of us feel like we do a pretty good job of modeling behaviors online. So then it's just important to understand that sometimes what we are doing looks different to a child than how we might perceive that it looks. So a simple example of that is that if you have to answer an email on your phone during family time because it's work-related, you know that you're doing something that is a requirement and you wouldn't choose to be doing it at that point. But to the children, they just see the back of the phone and they see their parents with their head down on the phone. So it's important that we both model good behaviors for them, and then when we are not modeling good behaviors because of necessity, such as that we explain to them why it is that we need to do it, and that they then will look to us as good role models in this space. So as I mentioned, 68% said they'd be happy if their kids behave like they do online, and 11% said they wouldn't, and the others were somewhere in the middle. And the last step in the toolkit is to plan with them, to set out that plan and agree, really based on all of the process that you've followed through, understanding the risks, understanding their lives online, being able to have that conversation about setting expectations, is what to do if something goes wrong. And by this stage, you'll be in a much stronger position in terms of being able to have confidence that young people will come to you if something does go wrong, because they know that you understand their environment, they feel like you've shown a real interest, and you've had those conversations, you've laid the foundation for them to approach you if something goes wrong. And I appreciate that we'll never achieve 100% for this, but I am certain that once you've been through those first 6 steps, this 7th step of planning will become a lot easier, and the likelihood that they'll come to you when something goes wrong is definitively greater. It can be difficult because this world is full of technologies and tools and experiences that we didn't have as parents, and that young people seem to do things that don't even seem to really make sense in terms of entertainment or attractiveness to us. It can be quite hard to get our heads around those things. So Netsafe has produced a series of guides. The latest added is the two latest added this week, the online gaming Whānau toolkit, which works through the online safety parent toolkit process that I've just mentioned, but with a focus on games. So for those of you whose children are primarily gamers, I'd recommend grabbing that toolkit from netsafe.org.nz. And for those of you whose children are always excited about TikTok, we have a family safety toolkit which we have constructed in collaboration with TikTok, again using that same framework to work through and understand it. And if your children are TikTokers, then I'd recommend having a look through that guide and starting that process with that guide as your center point. Just going to take a slight detour now and just mention the Harmful Digital Communications Act. There is legislation in this country to handle serious harmful digital communications called the Harmful Digital Communications Act. And there are two aspects to the Act. There's a criminal and civil process. They are both constructed to try to deter harmful behaviours online and also to give people victims of harmful behaviour rapid redress. What you need to know is that if communication is aimed at a person rather than offensive to a group, if it is offensive and breaches one of the communications principles within the Act, and they are very broad, the communications principles within the Act. They cover harassment, breach of confidence, they cover gross and indecent, threatening and menacing. So all of the kinds of negative content that most people would consider to be harmful are captured within those communications principles. And then if it is causing harm, then it meets the thresholds for action under the Act. And for most people, the first step that they'll want to take is to come to Netsafe and get some assistance with trying to resolve it. So if you are facing harmful digital communications, go to netsafe.org.nz, jump onto there's a little reporting button and report your experience, and one of the team will pick that up and attempt to resolve it. Or if your child is having that experience, also do the same, and the team will pick it up and help you to resolve it. And one of the key things that we do is we work with the major online content hosts. We work with them all the time, which means we understand all of their systems and their rules and their processes, which means that we can be quite successful in helping people in New Zealand to remove the content that is harming them if it's on one of those platforms. And that is often enough for people to feel as though they've got the resolution that they need to get that content down off those platforms. And if that is unsuccessful, then we can also mediate with other parties. We can talk, in the case of families, to schools and education professionals if that will assist. And just look for a way to resolve the harmful situation and remove the harm. When those systems all fail, then you do have, the people of New Zealand do have the legal right to go to the district court and make a complaint. But for the majority of families and for issues facing young people, of course, that is not the resolution path that we want to go on. We want to work to resolve it with all the parties, and Netsafe will help you to facilitate that. As a round out to the Net Safety Week, we established a few tips for the week, takeaways for people to help make Aotearoa safer during Net Safety Week. And the most important, and picking up on the theme throughout the digital parenting kit, is to talk with family and friends. Start conversation about online safety. We don't want to be having to have that conversation when something's gone wrong. Have the first conversation, I should say, when something's gone wrong. We want to have the first conversation in advance, and then we want to be able to come back to those conversations when something's going wrong, because that makes it a lot easier to deal with it. And there's plenty of material on netsafe.org.nz to help you get started with those conversations. And if you feel that you've had a lot of those basic conversations, you want to progress on to more difficult ones, such as sexting or adult content, or young people accessing adult content, then there is advice on the Netsafe website for things like that, including a collaboration with the classification office called the Bare Facts, which is really helpful for parents who want to get their heads around sexting and sharing of nudes and so forth. Tip number 2 is to just be a good digital citizen. There's no reason why we can't express our opinions online and have differences of opinion and contribute to the debates of society without harming people. And too often, unfortunately, people slip from disagreeing into abusiveness and aggression. So really encouraging people to remember that citizens have a right to share their opinions, but also citizens look after other citizens. So this week, remember that all of our actions affect other people online, and do our best to be good digital citizens. Swipe left on fake news, because fake news is a big and growing problem on the internet. We are seeing the tools of the internet enabling the distribution of fake news, which is harmful to people and harmful to society. But fake news is dangerous because we share it. It's not dangerous because it exists. It's dangerous because we share it and give it legitimacy. So all of us can do something to curb fake news, which is to be cautious about what we share and pass on. Because something arrives and it seems interesting, we shouldn't just repost it without checking that it's actually legitimate. And Netsafe has some tools on this. We have a thing called the Fake News Trainer, which you can visit via the Netsafe website, and just a fun way to understand kind of the tricks that people use to distribute fake news and to increase our ability to spot it and work against it. As I mentioned before, there are a series of topics that are difficult to discuss, but the discussions are really important within families. And one of those is sexting and nudes, as I mentioned before, and we encourage people to have a look at something called the Bare Facts, again at netsafe.org.nz, which is a guide to how to address this particular issue. And then lastly, know your rights. As I mentioned before, there's a Harmful Digital Communications Act. It gives you rights. It says that you shouldn't be harmed by digital communication, and that if you are, then you have a right to have support, to access support and have something done about that. The Harmful Digital Communications Act is not the only law that exists online by any stretch of the imagination. It's important to remember that if you are based within New Zealand, then you are subject to all of our laws. So all of our laws play out online just as they would in any other space. And just because the platforms that you are communicating on, or that people are communicating on with you, are based outside of New Zealand, that doesn't change that law. You have rights, those are protected by the law, and you should feel comfortable accessing them if you are being harmed online. And if you're not sure about this is one of the things that Netsafe can do. Our team can just advise you as to what aspects of the law people may be breaking if they're abusing you, and give you some advice on what you can do next, which sometimes will be help from us, and sometimes it will be help from other people. So just to reiterate, if you are being targeted, you can report to Netsafe. There's 4 different ways you can report. There's at the website, there's a report button, and the URL's there online. You can also send us an email at help@netsafe.org.nz. You can text Netsafe NZ to 4282, and you can call us on a free phone line 0508 Netsafe. And the process that you begin at there doesn't lock you into anything. The first connection with us is simply to discuss what your options are, and for you to make a decision about what you would like to happen in terms of progress from there forward. So in the first instance, it is an advisory service, and then if you wish to engage our specialist services in terms of advanced assistance, then the team will be happy to do that for you. But whatever it is that you're facing, if you're facing harm online, then I strongly recommend you pick up one of those points of connection with Netsafe and access the advice that our team can provide. And that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. Thank you for bearing with me through that. And I will now just have a look at the Q questions. So what can schools do to block children from accessing social media whilst at school? It is frustrating to see children on Instagram during class time. All of the public schools within New Zealand run a system provided by a provider called N4L, Network for Learning. And Network for Learning has the ability to block all categories of content, including social media, if the school so chooses, from the school network. The difficulty is, of course, that young people with phones can access using the telco network. They can bypass the system that's put in place by the school. So if you want to try to control it yourself as a parent, then you would have to look at parenting software. There are parent software systems on all of the major phone platforms, certainly on both iOS for Apple and Google Android, and also systems that run across multiple platforms. And you could use those things to restrict your young person's access during school time. I would caution that older users will often find ways around that kind of restriction. So, we have to be realistic that ultimately we may just have to find a way to convince our children to minimize the amount of time they're doing things which we would not like them to do, and that the technology may not be able to stop them. But there are certainly options. There's certainly options at the school level, and there are options for you personally at the device level if you wish to employ them. At netsafe.org.nz is the web address for Netsafe and the hub for many products and connections, and a recommended starting point for you in terms of any issues that you or your family and whānau face online. Thank you very much for your time today, and good luck.